All right, now for a demonstration on configuring a tablex. This is what we're going to produce. It's the sales performance report. It's in fact a table. It has fixed columns. And we can see here that the salespeople are actually grouped by country. And we see sales, we see the country and overall percentage that the salesperson has produced. We've also got target sales, and we've got some variance and conditional formatting. I've launched Report Builder, and I want to leverage the report template that I created earlier. So I should be able to come to my recents and open that report template, and I need to remember to save that immediately as my new report. And this will become the sales performance. Now the data that's going to be retrieved is actually coming from a data set in Power BI. Recall that we had the sales analysis report. I'm going to generate data from the same data set. So what I'll do here is come to the data sets of the workspace, and I can open up the settings. Because what I'll do in demonstration is I'm going to work with the XMLA endpoint. And here is the connection string that I can use for the report to connect. Yep. Copy it to the clipboard, and then I come back to Report Builder, and then I'm going to right-click my data sources. You would think I would use a Power BI dataset connection, but when using XMLA, I'm going to connect by using the SQL Server data provider for analysis services. Mm-hmm. So I'll provide a friendly name, sales analysis, for the data source, and then I will build up the connection string by pasting in that property. I'm then going to go ahead and choose the model, at which point I'm going to need to authenticate with the Power BI service. And then I select the model. We can test it. And we have a slight issue. But if I click OK, come to credentials, I'm going to say we don't need to use credentials.
That's right, because you used the modern authentication pop-up that was used.
There we go. And now we have success.
Yep.
XMLA connection is created. All right, so the next step then is to create a data set based on the data source. So I'll create the DS main data set and then launch the Query Designer. So this is the Query Designer for Analysis Services, and because I want to work with server aggregates, the first thing I'm going to do is switch from the default of the DAX Query Designer to the MDX Query Designer. And that's done up here on the toolbar. Switching from DAX to MDX. I'm warned that I'm going to lose all of my progress. At this stage, I'm quite happy for that to happen. And then what we see in the Query Designer is that we've got the metadata pane expressing this Power BI data set in terms of measures and KPIs and dimensions. So to build out my query, the first thing I'm going to do is expand the salesperson, and I'm going to then expand the salespeople hierarchy. Using drag drop, I will take the country and drop it into the query pane. And then I'll introduce a measure as well. At minimum, there must be one measure in order for these queries to work. So I'll drag sales in, and then while I'm at it, I'll bring in also that I would like to know target, and I would like to know the variance % from target. Now I would probably like to have salesperson in here as well. So we've got country, let me bring in salesperson. There we go. So my columns are country, salesperson, sales, target, and variance %. I have a link here in the query pane that when I click, it's going to actually execute the query right away. And there's the results that we see. So what else might I want to add here? If I'm looking at sales performance, I might also be interested in the status. And so I find that within my KPI folder here, that I have in fact another field for the status. Now what you're going to see when I run the query is that the values for status are coming back as null. Now that's because I'm not filtering by a time period. Mm-hmm. That then prompts me to bring in from my date dimension a filter that I drag above the query pane, and I'm going to filter by a year like, I don't know, I guess we could use current year, or fiscal year 2019 might be near enough. And let's rerun the query. Now what I'd like you to notice is that the sales performance is returning a value that is either 1, 0, or -1. This will become relevant later on when we map an indicator as a visualization to convey that 1 is we're on track, 0 is we're off track but not critically, and -1 is we're critically off track. So we'll come back to that configuration later on. Now from a parameterization point of view, note that I'm horizontally scrolling and there's a parameter pane right here, and I'm going to check it in order to parameterize this query. All right, so we'll go ahead and click OK. The MDX query has now been placed into the query box, and now if I go ahead and click OK, note that the report parameter is provided here as well. Okay, awesome. If I come back to the data set, we'll see several things. We have fields. And because we've used, in fact, the model is using percentage symbols. These are invalid. So what I'm going to do is just rename these fields. And in fact, sales performance status is just a little bit too long-winded. So I can use the fields here to rename them to something that's going to make my expressions much easier to write and to understand. Now we come down to parameters. We'll see that there's a mapping here to the query parameter to what is a report parameter. And if we look at the report parameter, we'll see that it has available values. And what I do like about this designer is that it has created a data set named date fiscal year. Now you don't see it here. It's actually a hidden data set, and if you want to, and you could modify it, you can show hidden data sets.
Yes.
Often you don't need to. So we'll leave that hidden for now.
I would generally recommend for people not to fiddle with those if they don't know what they're doing.
Well, yes, if you break things, it can be
Yes.
tricky, and sometimes you need to, the query designer does a lot of automatic things, and it's
Yes.
easy to disrupt what it's doing.
Yeah.
So do it only when necessary, but I've got to say, it's an educational experience to work out what it's doing and to fix it. And if you can't fix it, just delete the data set and start again. All right, so now we have the data set configured. There is a property on the report parameter that I'll turn off. By default, the MDX query designer will create multi-select parameters. For this report, it's a single year selection only. And then what I'm going to do is update the subtitle here to immediately reflect what the year is that's selected. Now, I'm using the trim function to actually trim the label of the parameter. And let me explain why. I'll explain why by previewing the report. That data set that's created is actually producing like a hierarchical representation. Do you see the all member and the leading spaces? And if it was a multi-level hierarchy, you might even see multi-indentations.
Yes, you would.
So the trim there was important because there are leading spaces. So I said, give me the label of the parameter, like 2019, and then reflect that. All right, I think we're ready to develop the table.
Yes.
All right, so parameters are set up, the data set's set up, and so here on the insert ribbon, we see the data regions. We could use the wizard.
Ooh, you're going to use the wizard?
No, sorry, Bear.
So,
We're going to insert the table. My preferred approach, again, is just right-click the canvas, insert the table where I'd like it to be, and then I'm going to position it immediately at the location of top left. All right, so let's introduce you to the Tablix template. You see that it consists of 3 columns and 2 rows. Let me point out to you that the 3 parallel bars here is indicating that you're at the detail grouping. Every row that the dataset brings back is at this level, and the header is actually just a cosmetic row. It doesn't actually bind to the data itself. So let's introduce the fields into the Tablix, and this is really easy. And I love the design here that when I hover over this text box, there's a field list picker. Choose the dataset, and then choose the field that you want to display. So I'm going to place the salesperson in the first column. Now note the way that the header was automatically populated with the name of the field, which is usually what you want. So let me then come in and add sales as the next column. Notice that it doesn't ask me which data source or data set. These can only be bound to a single data set. So now it knows which data set it belongs to. It's just a matter of choosing the fields and where they belong. To introduce new columns, remember I've also got the variance percent. You can just right-click these guides at the top. And then you've got these context menus that allow you to insert columns to the left or right. and then I'm going to bring in the variance percent here. Now, these guides also help you achieve multi-select. You see the way that by selecting the row guide for the header, I'm actually selecting 4 text boxes. They're just text boxes, so I can go ahead and do formats like this. Let's go ahead and do middle alignment. I'm going to use a background color of, maybe some type of silver or gray, and then I'll go ahead and make it bold. I also want to increase the height. Now, when you've got multi-selection going on, you should be able to come here and I'm going to increase the height to 0.35. Let me do the same for the detail row, selecting all of those text boxes, change the height to 0.35 and set the alignment to be middle. All right, now the first column, I'm going to adjust its width. And so its width is going to be 1.7. And then I'm going to multi-select sales and target. And with these, I can use, up on the Home ribbon tab, right justification, and I can apply formats. Now there's 2 ways to do formats. You can use the number formats here, or in your properties, if you're familiar with the formatting codes, you could enter a format code here directly. Now, my intention is to not use dollar symbols. Sometimes I find that obscures, so I'm not going to use currency. What I'll do is just format as a number with comma separated. All right. I don't want decimal places, so maybe by clicking here, I could say 0 decimal places. And so that is multi-formatted the 4 text boxes that we have in those 2 columns. For the variance percent, I would like that to be a percentage format and also to be right justified. And the header, let's revert that back to the percentage symbol. Remember, it was the field name wasn't allowed to use it, but there's nothing to stop us doing that within our report design. Well, it's probably time to have a preview. What does this look like? Why have we got 2 decimal places? Let me fix that. And I'd probably want 2 decimal places for the percentage. And while I'm looking at it, there are some percentages that are negative. Let's apply some conditional formatting. So they really stand out that anything that is less than 0 should be red. Yeah. So coming back, selecting both of these columns, the way that I often set format is because I'm familiar with the format codes in .NET. N0. N is numeric, 0 decimal places. I find it easy to remember.
And do you think most users would be familiar with that?
No, but I'm sharing with them one thing that they could do.
One nugget of knowledge?
They could do it by clicking here on the ribbon and they could format here.
Yes.
Okay, and there are lots of templates that will guide them, but if you know these codes, it's just really fast. Now, the color is really just a property of the text box, right?
Yes.
So if I right-click and open up the text box properties, all right, we find that font has color, and we have the ability to assign an expression to it.
That's true.
So instead of being black, as a constant, we'll just say if, from my fields, if the variance percent is less than 0, then return, and I like this, we have constants as well. You can just click them. Click red, comma, black. So with those 2 updates to formatting and to conditional formatting, let's see how that's worked out. Ooh. Paginated report bear, what do you think?
I'm impressed.
Do you think someone reading this report would want to know what the totals are?
I think so.
Right, and so you'll see that the TableX at the moment just has a detail row. So what we're going to do is add a total, and it's very, very straightforward. What I'm going to do is multi-select so that I've got my sales and my target and my variance percent. So I just held the control key down. Pretty standard. And then I right-click that selection, and then I add a total.
Yes.
So that, in fact, is the TableX footer that's been added to the end. So let's do some similar formatting to make this look nice. And I'm going to format that the height of this is 0.35, that we're using bold, and we're using the same silver color. Let's see what that looks like. So for fiscal year 2019, we can see for all salespeople the total sales, total target, and then the variance. So what's going on here?
Well, you didn't change that to be variance, did you?
I did change that.
Did you?
It is the variance percent.
Ah.
But the issue isn't that it's the wrong field.
See.
The issue is that we're summing ratios
You led
together.
it. Was led right into your trap.
And it is a common trap, especially for beginners, which Chris is not a beginner. But here's the thing. If we look at functions and we look at aggregate, we have this very special function that says returns a custom aggregate as defined by the data provider.
Yes.
The data provider in this case is Power BI with a data set. So before I make a modification, I like to show you this. This is what the query looks like. Just bear with me for a moment. And I'm not modifying it, but I am going to come here, and if I right-click this formula, I can change the aggregate function here to use aggregate. Now what that means is, and let's look at the result, is that what we should be seeing is the result for the entire fiscal year, but it wasn't the report rendering that achieved that. This is what did it. So come back, let's copy that query to the clipboard, compare it to what I just did. And what we should see is there's going to be a difference. And the difference is likely to be here. What it's really done is injected a request for the all salespeople. So it has literally modified the query. The table says, I need a higher level aggregate, and I'm totally impressed to this day. Wasn't anything we needed to do, just modify the aggregate function that was being used. Now we could do the same for sales and target, but the fact is they're summed anyway.
Yes.
We could push it back to the server, but Report Builder could do this. One other thing to note is that if we come back to the query designer and we run that query and look at the preview result, there is where the aggregate's coming from. Very impressive. So if you're doing analytic reporting and your measures must be evaluated back in Power BI, this is how you will do it. All right, room for improvement though. A simple list of all salespeople is useful, but the company measures performance at the level also of, I think it's sales territories, or no, countries. Right, so remember that we added country as a field. So what I'm now going to do is add a new grouping, a nested grouping. And the way that I'm going to do this is in the group window. So see down here, the grouping pane shows me that I have the details. And what I'm going to do is right-click here and say, but add a new group that is a parent group. Now look at where this flexibility comes in. Parent group, child group, adjacent before, adjacent after. I'm going to keep things relatively simple here. I'm going to perform a grouping on country, and I would like to add in a header. Now, what the TableX does by default is this. In fact, if we run it, you can see that it's added a new column, and what you're going to get is this type of grouping like this. I could live with that, but to me, that takes up more space. I really want that width for other things. So I'm just going to come in here and delete that column. And what I've got here is a row header for the country. So I can just put the country here. All right, so have a look at this brace here telling me that that's a group nested within, or the detail is nested within the country group. All right, so what we can do is this, format this first of all, and probably use a contrasting color like a lighter gray. All right, and then I can come in here and choose my sales and my target. And you see the way that it automatically used the aggregate function because it's not at a detail level. And when I use the variance percent, remember I'm going to have to switch it to summarize by using that aggregate function. All right, and I'll still want to update the height to 0.35. What does this now look like? All right, some formatting issues. We can address that. And so it looks like none of the formats have carried over. Well, I'll just have to reapply them. But what we see now is within country, we get to see the employees. Yep. So the improvement that I would suggest here is, of course, fix the formatting. It didn't inherit. And I might want to achieve a type of indenting to show that the salespeople are nested within the country. All right, so first of all, multi-select here. I use my shortcut format of N0. And here it's P2 for percentage with 2 decimal places. For the text box that is for salesperson, there's a property called padding. All right, so what I'm going to do is achieve a padding on the left of 8 point. And you can already see the preview here. And so if you want that nested appearance, that's achieved through that property.
I have to say that for Power BI desktop authors who are viewing this for the very first time, they must be salivating at all the things that you can do with the table, because if you look at the things that people ask for repeatedly, there are often the things you can do in Paginated Reports just right out of the box.
It's just the fine-grained control.
Yes.
And you know what I've found over my years of experience is that no grid is the same as any other grid. And here you can control almost down to the cell precisely what your report requires. Well, let's make it even a little more interesting and to work with the aggregate functions and the scoping. And so there's now a requirement to express that a salesperson within their country, what was their percentage contribution? So what I'll do is insert a new column to the right of sales. And I'm going to provide a header that this is really the country percent. All right, now, because it's incidental data, I just like to reduce the font so it's not standing out as much, and maybe even the width. So what I want in this column is that for each salesperson, what is your contribution? Width, 0.7. The expression needs to go right here. So let's build it up. Expression equals. From my fields, give me the value of sales. That will give me the value of the individual salesperson's sales, because I'm at detail level. But then I can use the sum function here to say I would want the sum of sales value, comma, at the level of country. That is the name of my group, all right? It must match in case and name to this. And so we're actually reaching for a higher level value. Now, technically I should be using the aggregate function, but we know that sum will work fine here.
You like to live on the edge.
I do, and here I am, Chris. P2 is my format. And let's see how this works. There we go. Lynn Sophius, being the only salesperson, is 100% of her country. Yet Garrett and Jose have a 35 to 64 split. Shall we see one more example of this? And I think we can bring this demo to a near end. All right, so what if we wanted to know what their contribution across all of the sales was?
Oh, now we're getting really tricky.
We don't even have a group for that, right?
Yep.
So insert to the right, and this will be my overall percent. And we'll set this to a width of 0.7 again. And what do we have here? And a P2. So this time it's going to be what is the salesperson over the entire data set. All right, so again, from my fields, what is the sales value divided by the sum of the same value, but this time the scope will be at the data set level. DS main. Again, it's case sensitive. There we go. Lynn Sophius represents nearly 4% of all sales. All right, so what would happen if we looked at print layout?
Ooh.
Page 1 of 2. Now, when we navigate to page 2, there's no header.
That's true.
All right, so the table is just overflowing. There's just one more thing we need to do to let that work.
And this is really important for folks, because one of the most common questions I get is, why do I have this not paginating the way I want it to?
And, you know, it's hidden down here.
Yes.
As to why, not quite sure, but that's why we're doing this training. So we turn the grouping pane into advanced mode, and what you'll see is you've got your groupings, but you've got these static groups in there as well. They actually just represent, for example, that is this. All right, and all of the columns are these statics here. Now,
Exactly.
we've got a host of properties to control precisely what these groupings do. So when I click static here, it's going to require me to come to a property, and that property is keep with group. Let me expand here. Keep with group, and the answer here will be after, and repeat on new page, true. Simple.
We're laughing because this question comes up all the time. And it's a very common, I mean, of course you want the header to be repeated on every page.
Well, with flexibility, at times can come complexity.
Yes.
All right, so let's put it to the test. Navigating to page 2, aha. That's how we see the table header. So that concludes this demonstration, but stay tuned. There's more work to be done to finalize this report design. But let's first cover the next topic of data visualizations.
Great.